Europe suffered centuries of barbaric, tribal warfare. Every castle, clan, and kingdom fought for every inch of land. But at the end of the 11th century, one cause unified Europe like never before: the Crusades. In 1095, the Pope called on every Christian man in Europe to take up arms and head to Jerusalem to recapture the Holy Lands from the so-called infidels, the Muslims. Millions would heed the call, slaughtering countless numbers along the way. But the Crusades had another hidden legacy. They birthed the world's most infamous secret societies, the Knights Templar and the Order of Sion. And clues to their mysterious origins are buried here in the underworld. For 200 years, the Knights Templar, a wealthy Christian paramilitary group, was one of the most powerful organizations in a turbulent world. Their creation can be traced back to a castle in the tiny Belgian town of Bouillon, and the man who owned it, Godfried, the first Christian ruler of Jerusalem.
I'm meeting a man named Rudy Schotta. He's taking me in a tunnel under that structure up on the hill, Bouillon Castle, the European heart of the First Crusade, and the place where the Templars themselves would have worked. Nice castle you have here.
Yes.
It is a strategic place to have one.
This castle dates back to the 10th century, when the church was the only constant in a chaotic Europe. Feudal lords battled relentlessly over their own small patches of land. Finally, in 1095, a united front emerged, in the form of a holy war. The Crusades pitted Christian invaders against Muslim armies a world away. But they began here in Bouillon Castle. Bouillon Castle was built on a hill, protected on two sides by a river. And much like the Pentagon today, it was built with 3 layers of defensive walls, each connected by a drawbridge. The third and final line of defense was a dry moat, some 30 feet deep, that was booby-trapped. In an emergency, the drawbridge would go up, and the moat could quickly be filled with water. Without these state-of-the-art safeguards against turbulent times, Godfrey could never have survived long enough to march on the Holy Land.
What we're standing on here in the Middle Ages would have been a drawbridge.
Drawbridge, you even can see the hole.
Okay,
Yeah.
and this would have been water below.
Rudy and I were testing the ancient medieval defense of a castle so secure it was rumored to be the vault of some of the greatest treasures in history. Holy relics brought back from the Crusades, including the Ark of the Covenant.
Right down there?
Okay.
This is cool. So this is where it would have been filled up with water. This whole space would have been filled.
Exactly.
This moat was usually dry, but any attacker foolish enough to clamber down here in heavy armor was in for a nasty surprise. A channel 25 feet above could be opened up, and the water would come pouring in. Unable to move quickly in 50 pounds of chainmail, invaders faced a horrible death by drowning.
Opening that gate, the water would surge out of here, and they have a whole nother line of defense to protect this castle.
Once we crossed over the moat, we worked our way deeper into the castle, along a winding corridor into the lowest level of the structure.
So, let's enter here. Watch your head.
Ah, this is great.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're underground, under Bouillon Castle here.
Yes.
Godfrey, the owner of this impressive fortress, did bow to a master, the Pope. In 1095, when the Holy Father called on all Christian men to take up arms and head to Jerusalem, Godfrey was one of the first to respond. He raised a private army of 40,000 men, an expensive proposition.
So how does he afford to launch a crusade? financially?
Financially, it's very simple. He sold his castle.
He sold this castle.
He sold this castle.
And so then he has the money to go out and...
He has the money to get other soldiers and equipment and so on and so on.
Godfrey had no trouble finding willing recruits. 1095 was a brutal year in Europe. Disease, starvation, and violence were constants. The promise of the forgiveness of sins and the rich plunder waiting in the Holy Land drove 600,000 Christians to raise their weapons and slaughter the supposed infidels.
So the church offers the ultimate prize. You go on this crusade, you get into heaven no matter how many sins you commit.
Exactly.
When Duke Godfried of Bouillon marched off to the Holy Land, he already had a reputation as a pious, honorable leader. But Godfrey was also a man of his time, and the 11th century was a barbaric age.
So now we are coming in the part where we find prisons.
So this is a bad room, I can feel it.
Like most castles at the time, Bouillon was a fortress, a home, and a prison. Under the Romans, there had been the rule of law. But after the empire's fall, every petty ruler had the power of life and death over his subjects. Rudy led me to a room where Godfrey, the Pope's staunch defender, routinely would have criminals and rivals tortured and killed.
So we're in a prison cell here, but what is this?
This prison cell is very special because it's like a little chamber.
Oh, yeah.
It only has one entry, and this is here. It's the reason why we call this oubliette.
Oubliette. What does that mean in English?
To be forgotten. You go in there, I close it.
That's it, I'm gone.
And you're gone.
All right, here I go.
Prisoners thrown into the oubliette never came out again. They died slowly of thirst and hunger. This was 11th century justice.
This is so creepy. I mean, it's really gruesome to think of these prisoners brought down here in the dark. To think that the man in charge of this castle is off fighting a war for God, a crusade to reclaim the promised land. And back at home, in his basement, there's somebody tortured to death.
Duke Godfrey conquered Jerusalem in 1099. But 1 year later, he died of the plague in the Holy Land and never returned to reclaim his castle. But some believe before he died, he founded an order of knights dedicated to protecting Christians in the Holy Land, the Knights Templar. Over the next 100 years, the Knights Templar grew rich off the treasures of the East. And when they returned home to this land, they may have brought some of the most precious ones back here.
Rumor has it the Knights Templar rescued the Christian relics from the Holy Land and brought them to Europe.
That's a good rumor. I think you can say probably positive.
They could be right in this castle.
Well, could be. I don't know.
It may only be a legend, but some believe that the Knights Templar concealed the Ark of the Covenant and the Holy Grail here, in the castle that bankrolled the Crusades.
It's incredible to think how central this man, Godfried van Bouillon, was. He is chosen to lead the first crusade that retakes the Promised Land, conquers Jerusalem. He sanctions this group called Poor Knights of Christ, which becomes the Knights Templar. So it all comes back to this man, Godfried van Bouillon. It all comes back to this castle.